Imagine a girl who walks out of her home on an ordinary afternoon carrying nothing but a camera, a denim skirt, and the innocence of a world that still felt safe. And then she is swallowed whole by a silence so deep it stretches across decades. This is not just a disappearance, it is a wound that never stops bleeding, a riddle that rearranges every life it touches. Because when Amy Billig vanished, she didn't just leave behind a mystery, she left behind a mother who would spend the rest of her life chasing shadows, confronting monsters, and navigating a labyrinth of truth, lies, and unbearable hope. This is the story of what happens when a single moment fractures a family, a community, and the very idea of safety itself. There's a particular kind of suffering that does not scream. It whispers, it lingers, it settles into the smallest corners of a person's life. This is the suffering of uncertainty, the kind that Amy Billig's disappearance inflicted upon her mother, Susan, for more than 30 years. When someone dies, as painful as it is, there is closure, there is ritual, there is community. But when someone disappears, the only thing you bury is your peace of mind. You do not live with an answer, you live with an open wound. And every day the world asks you to function as though you were not bleeding. For Susan, hope became both her lifeline and her tormentor. It kept her going, but it also kept her from resting. Every morning she woke up knowing that Amy could be somewhere, hurt, alive, trapped, lost, or gone forever. And so she learned to exist in a psychological limbo, a suspended emotional reality where nothing is certain and everything is possible. This state is not passive, it is active, consuming, relentless. It requires reconstruction of identity because you are no longer just a parent, you become an investigator, a negotiator, a strategist, a seeker, a warrior. With every phone call, every rumor, every tip, your nervous system learns to brace itself. You become intimately familiar with adrenaline and exhaustion. You learn to live between two breaths, never fully exhaling. For Susan, the emotional terrain was shaped by a mixture of guilt and hope. Guilt because she wondered whether Amy's freedom-loving spirit came from her. Guilt because she allowed her daughter to hitchhike in a time when life felt safer than it truly was. And hope because without it, she feared becoming hollow. Hope gave her the courage to chase every lead, from biker bars to distant cities, from whispered confessions to anonymous sightings. But hope also imprisoned her, keeping her tethered to the possibility that Amy was somewhere just out of reach. Uncertainty reshapes relationships as well. For the Billig family, the disappearance created both unity and isolation. Ned tried to balance the role of a father with the role of a protector, but the situation was too large for any one person. Their son, Joshua, grew up in the long shadow of his sister's absence, feeling her presence everywhere because she was missing everywhere. When a person vanishes, the household reorganizes around the void. People tiptoe around grief because it has no end point. They speak about the missing person in the present tense because the past tense feels like betrayal. They memorize the phone number of detectives more readily than the birthdays of friends. They learn to sleep lightly because the phone might ring at any hour. The emotional landscape of disappearance also includes obsession. Not the dangerous kind, but the deeply human kind. The obsession with understanding, with piecing together a narrative that refuses to be whole, with finding that one missing detail that might unlock the truth. Susan's obsession was not madness, it was devotion. It was the manifestation of love stretched across decades. Every mother is wired to protect her child, but what happens when the threat is invisible? When the danger is a mystery rather than a person? Then the mind tries to fill the gaps. It becomes hypervigilant, scanning the world for patterns, symbols, meanings. a white van, a tattooed biker, a diary entry, a phone call from someone who knows too much, a photograph of a truck that looks familiar. These fragments become emotional landmines. Each one holds the potential for answers and the potential for devastation. And so navigating this emotional terrain requires a new kind of resilience, not the resilience of bouncing back, but of carrying on despite the weight of the unknown. It requires learning to live with two truths simultaneously, that Amy might be alive and that she might not be. This duality is exhausting, but it is also profoundly human because love refuses to choose one truth over the other. Over time, uncertainty alters the way a mother loves. Love becomes active rather than gentle. It becomes a mission rather than a feeling. It becomes the force that organizes the household, dictates the schedule, shapes the identity. And in Susan's case, love also became her voice. She spoke for Amy when Amy could not speak. She advocated for her when systems failed her. She endured the cruelty of hoaxers, stalkers, and false promises, but she did not stop, because the disappearance of a child redefines the boundaries of devotion. And as the years passed, the emotional landscape shifted again. Hope aged. It became quieter, more brittle, but it did not disappear. It softened into a longing that was at once tender and fierce. Even as Susan grew older, even as the evidence grew colder, her love remained active. And this is the paradox of disappearance. Absence becomes a presence, uncertainty becomes a companion, and hope becomes both a refuge and a risk. When she died, Susan left behind not a resolution, but a legacy, an unyielding expression of what it means to love in the face of the unknown. Her journey reminds us that the human heart is capable of extraordinary endurance, even when confronted by silence, mystery, and fear. And it shows us that sometimes the most powerful stories are not the ones that end, but the ones that remain open.
And it shows us that in every open story, the human mind instinctively searches for patterns, reaching toward fragments of truth as though they are rope lines in a storm. This is the psychology of fragmented truth, the place where logic and longing intersect. In Amy's case, the world offered not a clear narrative, but scattered pieces that refused to fit neatly together. A diary entry, a white van, a camera found 250 miles away, witnesses who said she was on a motorcycle, a man named Paul who knew too much, a stalker whose nickname matched an entry Amy wrote about Hank. Each piece alone is intriguing. Together, they form a psychological labyrinth. Humans are not built to tolerate ambiguity. We are storytelling creatures. When something is missing, an explanation, a body, a conclusion, we instinctively create narratives to fill the void. And this instinct becomes magnified when the missing piece is a person we love. For the Billig family, these fragments became both clues and emotional triggers. Every detail, no matter how small, carried the weight of possibility. Consider the diary entry about Hank and South America. On paper, it is simply a teenage thought, but in the context of Amy's disappearance, it becomes electrified. It becomes a clue that seduces the imagination. And when, decades later, a man named Henry, whose nickname happened to be Hank, was discovered to have harassed Susan for years, the connection felt almost too striking to ignore. The mind begins to weave a narrative. What if he knew her? What if he followed her? What if the diary entry was not a coincidence? This is the power of fragmented truth. It forces people to become interpreters of their own trauma. The same thing happened with the biker gang sightings. Multiple witnesses recalled seeing a girl who looked like Amy. A former biker described her accurately. A convenience store manager remembered a girl who did not speak, whose behavior matched Amy's vegetarian habits. These glimpses formed a mosaic of maybes, and in the absence of certainty, maybes can feel like evidence. But the mind also plays tricks in such states. When we are desperate for answers, we become more susceptible to suggestion. We start to see meaning in coincidences, patterns in randomness. It is not irrational.
It is human. It is the psyche protecting itself from despair by assembling a narrative, any narrative that feels coherent. Fragmented truth also affects trust. When clues conflict, who do you believe? The police who dismissed early leads? The biker who alternated between confessions and contradictions? The stalker who claimed to know nothing of Amy? Or the strangers who thought she saw her? Each source of information becomes a test of intuition, and intuition is shaped by emotion, not certainty. This constant tension creates a psychological fatigue. You begin questioning your judgment. You begin doubting your instinct. You begin wondering whether you are chasing truth or chasing hope. And yet you cannot stop, because to stop would mean accepting a void. Fragmented truth also affects time. For those outside the case, years can pass in silence, but for those living the story, every fragment reactivates the timeline. A sighting in 1976 can feel as immediate as a phone call in 1995. The past does not stay in the past. It loops and reopens with every clue. The brain replays scenarios endlessly. Was Amy in that van? Was she on that bike? Was she taken to that bar in Tulsa? Did she overdose? Was she trafficked? Could she have survived? These questions do not resolve. They circulate, creating a psychological echo chamber where finality feels both desired and feared. And when a new clue emerges, even decades later, it reignites the hope that the story could shift. This is why when the lead from England appeared, Susan traveled across an ocean. The human mind cannot ignore even the faintest possibility when the stakes are this high. But the fragmented nature of these leads means that closure remains elusive. Every promising thread unravels just enough to keep the truth out of reach, and that uncertainty fuels the imagination. It keeps the story alive, not because people want mystery, but because they need meaning. They need coherence. They need the world to make sense again. Fragmented truth also shapes identity. Susan did not merely search for Amy, she became the person who searched for Amy. Her role in the world was reconstructed around those fragments. She lived not in the certainty of what she knew, but in the possibilities of what she didn't. This is the profound psychological cost of disappearance. It forces people to build their lives around unanswered questions. And yet, in this fragmentation, there is also resilience, because every fragment, every coincidence, every almost clue represents something essential, the refusal to let a person vanish from memory. Fragmented truth may not deliver closure, but it keeps the missing alive in the story of those who love them. And in that sense, the very things that torment us, the unanswered questions, the half-clues, the coincidences, become the threads that tether us to hope, to purpose, and to each other.
And in that sense, the very threads that keep us tethered to hope also carry a hidden weight, a cost that accumulates quietly, day after day, until it becomes a second life you are forced to live. Because searching is not just an action, it is a state of being. It reshapes the body, the mind, the relationships, the very architecture of a person's world. This is the unseen cost of relentless searching, the part of the story that rarely makes headlines, yet defines every waking moment for those left behind. For Susan and her family, the search for Amy was never a series of isolated efforts. It was the framework around which every decision, every plan, every year of their lives unfolded. When you search for someone who is missing, time behaves differently. The future becomes suspended, because how do you move forward when the person you love might return tomorrow? How do you commit to a new chapter when the old one remains unfinished? And so the search becomes the calendar. Days are marked not by holidays, but by anniversaries. The day she vanished, the day a clue appeared, the day a rumor was disproven, the day a stranger claimed to know something. Searching becomes the rhythm that the heart beats to. There is also the cost of identity. Before Amy disappeared, Susan was a mother, a wife, an artist, a member of her community. But after the disappearance, she became primarily one thing, a seeker.
Every conversation, every encounter, every decision was filtered through the lens of, could this bring me closer to Amy? And while this transformation was born from love, it required sacrifices. Friendships faded because people didn't know how to sit with her grief. Joyful moments became laced with guilt. Even rest felt like betrayal. When you are searching for someone, the idea of self-care becomes complicated. Sleeping means missing a phone call. Taking a vacation feels like abandoning the search. Laughing feels like forgetting. So the search becomes a way of life, and in that process, the self becomes rearranged around a mission that was never chosen. The emotional cost is mirrored by the physical one. Chronic stress does not simply live in the mind, it embeds itself in the body. It sharpens the senses until they become raw, disrupts sleep until exhaustion becomes familiar, and keeps the nervous system in a near-constant state of alertness. For Susan, every ring of the phone triggered a spike of adrenaline. Every unknown number carried the potential for breakthrough or devastation. Over years, this hypervigilance wears down the body like water wearing down stone. Relationships, too, begin to strain under the weight of perpetual searching. Grief affects people in different ways, and when there is no resolution, those differences can become chasms. Some family members hold tightly to hope, others protect themselves through pessimism. Some want to chase every lead, others want to step back. These differences are not signs of weakness, they are signs of humanity. But when a loved one is missing, they can create cracks in even the strongest bonds. The unseen cost also includes the erosion of trust in the world around you. When a child disappears, the world becomes unfamiliar, unpredictable, dangerous. You begin to question not only strangers, but systems. You see the ways investigations fail, the ways crucial opportunities slip through fingers, the ways justice moves too slowly or not at all. You begin to carry a quiet disillusionment, an awareness that safety is more fragile than most people realize. And yet, despite all of this, searching also becomes a source of meaning. It becomes an expression of love, so profound that it defies exhaustion. Susan's search for Amy gave her life a direction, even as it drained her. Each lead she pursued was an act of devotion. Each person she questioned was a prayer disguised as persistence. Each door she knocked on was a refusal to let her daughter fade into the category of forgotten missing girls. And that, too, is part of the unseen cost, the pressure of being the one who remembers, the one who keeps the story alive. Because when you stop searching, the world stops searching. When you stop asking questions, the case becomes cold, not just in the files, but in the collective memory. Susan carried that responsibility alone for many years, and it shaped her existence until her final day. The legacy she left is not simply the record of a mother who refused to give up. It is the record of what love looks like, stretched across decades. It is the reminder that searching is not just a physical journey, but an emotional, spiritual, and psychological endurance test. It shows us that love can make a person brave beyond measure, but it can also carve deep scars that never fully heal. And perhaps the most striking truth is this: searching does not end even when life does. It passes on, it shifts, it transforms. It continues in the people who remain, in the stories they tell, in the hope they refuse to abandon. This is the cost and the legacy of a search that never finds its final answer. If you're still here watching, thank you. Before you go, please subscribe to our channel, Dark Frame Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another real-life mystery like this.